My name is Clara Hensley. I'm 34 years old. When I was 22, I sat at the kitchen table and watched my mother slide a bank statement across the Formica top like it was nothing, like it was a grocery list, like it was a note about who forgot to take out the trash. We used the education account, she said. For the wedding, Diane needed it more. $41,000. Gone. Not stolen, not lost. Handed to my sister's florist, her caterer, her photographer, her venue deposit. Handed to a party that lasted 6 hours. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I picked up the statement, folded it in half, and put it in my pocket. My father didn't look up from his newspaper. I said nothing. That silence was the best decision I ever made. Because 10 years later, I walked back into that house with a document in my hand that made my mother grip the kitchen counter so hard, her knuckles went white. What was in that document? What I built in those 10 years without a single dollar of their help, and what happened to every assumption my family ever made about me, that's the story I'm going to tell you. But before I do, if this is your first time here, take a moment to subscribe. I share stories like this every week, and drop your city and your local time in the comments. I genuinely love knowing where you're watching from. Now let me take you back, not to the kitchen table, further, to the beginning. Hartwell, Indiana, population 12,000, 1 main street, 2 stoplights, a grain elevator you could see from every corner of town. My father, Robert Hensley, managed the hardware store on Birch Avenue for 27 years. Same apron, same hours, same handshake with every customer. He was the kind of man who knew everyone's name and couldn't remember his daughter's birthdays without my mother writing them on the calendar in red marker. My mother, Patricia, ran the household the way a general runs a campaign. Every decision was hers. Every purchase, every plan, every priority. She didn't ask. She announced. My sister Diane was 3 years older than me and lived in the center of every room she entered. Loud laugh, easy smile, the kind of person who could talk to anyone for 20 minutes and make them feel like they'd known her for years. My parents loved her without effort. It was the kind of love that didn't need to try. I was the other one. Not a bad child, never in trouble, never failing. I was quiet in the way that gets mistaken for contentment. I read. I organized. I kept lists and notebooks that I hid under my mattress because I didn't want anyone to know how carefully I was watching everything. At 12, I noticed that Diane's school fees were paid the week they arrived. Mine sat on the counter for 3 or 4 days. Small thing. I wrote it down. At 14, Diane got a car for her birthday. A used Honda, nothing extravagant, but it was hers. My birthday that year came with a card and $20. I bought a notebook with it. At 16, my parents opened a savings account. They told me it was for college, my college. They showed me the account number, showed me the initial deposit of $800, and my mother said, "We're going to put something in every month, Clara. You're going to have options." I believed her. I wrote it down. For 6 years, I watched that account. I didn't touch it. I didn't ask about it. I just knew it was there, growing slowly. The way a field grows, you don't watch it every hour, but you trust the process. I graduated high school with a 3.9 gigapascals and a full list of college applications. I got into 3 schools. My first choice was a university, 4 hours away. Business program, good reputation. Not the most expensive option, but not cheap either. The total cost for 4 years with room and board was going to come to around $70,000. I had the savings account. I had a partial scholarship. I had a plan. And then, one Sunday afternoon in August, 2 weeks before I was supposed to leave, my mother sat me down at the kitchen table. Diane was getting married. She'd been with Marcus for 2 years. He was fine. Steady job, decent enough. The wedding was going to be the following June. And the venue Diane had chosen, a converted barn outside of town with string lights and a catering package, cost more than my parents had prepared for. We had to make some adjustments, my mother said. She slid the statement across the table. $41,000. Withdrawn. Account closed. I looked at the number. I looked at my mother. I looked at my father, who was reading the sports section as if this conversation wasn't happening. "The wedding is important," my mother said. "It's a once-in-a-lifetime event. And your sister?" I folded the statement, put it in my pocket. "Okay," I said. My mother blinked. She'd been ready for an argument. I could see it in how she was sitting straight-backed, chin lifted, prepared. "Okay?" she repeated. "Okay," I said again. Then I stood up, went to my room, and closed the door. I sat on the edge of my bed for a long time. Long enough that the light through the window changed from afternoon gold to something flat and gray. I opened the notebook under my mattress. I wrote the date. I wrote the amount. I wrote one sentence underneath it. "They showed me who they are. Now I know." I didn't cry. I wasn't even angry. Not in the shaking, burning way I might have expected. It was something colder, clearer, like a fog lifting to show you exactly where the road actually goes. I had 2 weeks before school started. I had a partial scholarship that covered tuition but not housing. I had $412 in a checking account I'd built from babysitting and summer jobs. I had a problem, and nobody was going to solve it for me. Before I tell you what I did next, I need to stop for a second, because I know some of you watching right now have been at that kitchen table. Maybe it wasn't a college fund. Maybe it was something else, an opportunity someone took from you without asking, without apology, without even fully understanding what they were taking. A door that closed while someone else walked through it ahead of you. If you know that feeling, type "times I kept going" times in the comments, because that's what this story is about, not what was taken. What was built after. Now let me tell you what I did in those 2 weeks. I went to the university's financial aid office the Monday after that Sunday. I explained my situation, not emotionally, factually. I said my expected family contribution had changed. I said I needed to reopen my financial package. I brought every document I had, tax returns I'd found in my parents' filing cabinet, scholarship letters, the account statement my mother had handed me with the zero balance at the bottom. The financial aid counselor was a woman named Dr. Sharon Wells. She was probably 50, reading glasses on a chain, the kind of calm that comes from having seen every version of this conversation. She looked at my documents. She asked a few questions. She typed something into her computer. Then she told me about 3 things I hadn't known existed. A need-based supplemental grant, a work-study position in the university's accounting department, and an emergency housing stipend for students whose family circumstances changed after initial enrollment. I walked out of that office with a revised package that covered 90% of my first year. I called no one to tell them. I packed my own car, the used Civic I'd bought for $2,200 the previous summer, loaded it on a Thursday morning while my parents were at work, left a note on the kitchen counter that said, "Time's gone to school. I'll call when I'm settled," and drove 4 hours north. My mother called that evening. "You could have waited," she said. "We could have helped you load the car." I had everything handled, I told her. She heard something in my voice that I couldn't have named at the time. Looking back, I think it was the sound of a door closing. Not in anger, in decision. The next 4 years taught me things I couldn't have learned any other way. I worked 20 hours a week in the accounting department, starting the first semester. Filing, data entry, simple reconciliation tasks at first. By junior year, I was doing preliminary audits on departmental budgets. The woman who supervised me, a professor named Dr. Ellen Marsh, started giving me extra assignments, not because she had to, because she was curious about me. "You see patterns," she told me once, looking over a spreadsheet I'd cleaned up. "Most students your age see numbers. You see the story underneath them." I didn't know what to do with that. I filed it away. My mother called every Sunday. The conversations were careful, surface level. How are classes? How is the weather? Diane's wedding was beautiful. You should see the photos. I said appropriate things. I asked appropriate questions. I did not go home for Diane's wedding. I said I had exams. I didn't have exams. I had a part-time shift at a restaurant I'd picked up to cover the 10% the aid package didn't reach. My mother was hurt. She said so. I said I was sorry. I wasn't. I graduated in 4 years with a degree in accounting and a 3.87 gigapascals. I had a job offer before graduation from a mid-sized financial consulting firm in Chicago. Starting salary $52,000. Not a fortune, a foundation. My parents came to graduation. My mother cried. My father shook my hand and said, "We're proud of you, Clara." He meant it. I believed that he meant it. I also believed it didn't undo anything. Diane came too, pregnant with her first child, holding Marcus's hand, her face soft and happy. She hugged me for a long time. "I know it wasn't fair," she whispered. It was the closest thing to an acknowledgement I ever got from anyone in that family about what happened. I held on to it, not as ammunition, just as a small, true thing. I moved to Chicago 3 weeks later. The first 3 years in Chicago, I kept my head down and worked. The consulting firm was demanding. 70-hour weeks during busy seasons. Travel. Complicated clients who spoke in a language of financial abstractions that I had to learn to translate into something real and actionable. I learned fast. By year 2, I was running my own client accounts. By year 3, I was the youngest person in my cohort to be staffed on a due diligence project for a mid-market acquisition. I saved aggressively, not because I was afraid, because I was building. Every month, I put 30% of my take-home into a brokerage account. I read everything I could find about investment strategy. I made mistakes. I corrected them. I made better decisions. I also, quietly, started tracking something else. My parents' financial situation. Not obsessively, not maliciously. But I was their daughter, and I understood money better than they did, and I could see, in the gaps between what they said and what they didn't say, that things at home were becoming difficult. My father's hardware store had been struggling for years. Big box retail had arrived in Hartwell, and it was doing to his store what it had done to every small hardware business in every small town across the country. He refinanced the store's property in my junior year of college. He refinanced again 2 years after I graduated. My mother didn't mention any of this directly, but I could hear it. In how quickly she changed subjects, in how she stopped asking when I was coming home and started asking more carefully worded questions about my salary, my benefits, my savings. I said appropriate things. I asked appropriate questions. I kept building. Year 5, I left the consulting firm. Not dramatically, not in frustration. I left because I had found something specific that I was exceptionally good at, and I had decided to go do it on my own terms. The something specific was this: identifying undervalued small businesses with structural financial inefficiencies, acquiring minority stakes, restructuring the financial operations, and growing the value. In plain language, I found struggling businesses, bought into them cheaply, fixed what was wrong, and sold my stake at a profit once the value had grown. I started with 4 businesses in my first year operating independently: a regional printing company, a small chain of dry cleaners, a family-owned logistics firm, and a specialty food distributor. Every one of them had the same problem in different forms. They were making money but keeping it badly. The financial structures were inefficient, the reporting was incomplete, and the owners were too close to the day-to-day to see the patterns. I saw the patterns. By the end of year 1 on my own, my total assets under management were valued at roughly $3 million. My personal equity stake was around $800,000. I told no one in my family. I still called my mother every Sunday. "How are classes?" she still sometimes asked habit before correcting herself. "How is work? How is Chicago?" Diane had her second child. My father's store was down to 2 employees, including himself. One Sunday, my mother said, without any preamble, in the careful tone she used when she'd been rehearsing, "Dad is thinking about selling the store. We're wondering what that might look like financially." I said, "That's probably a smart decision. The market for independent retail is very difficult right now." She waited. "I didn't offer anything else. We were hoping maybe you could take a look," she said, "at the finances, just with your professional eye. Send me the documents," I said. "I'll look at them." She sent them. I looked at them. I called her back 3 days later and gave her a 15-minute summary of what the sale was likely to yield, what the tax implications were, what they'd need to set aside for retirement, and what they could realistically expect to live on. It was not a good picture. The store's debt had consumed most of what a sale would generate. After settling the second refinancing, my parents would walk away with approximately $40,000. $41,000 had paid for Diane's wedding flowers and catering and photographs. I did not say that out loud. I said, "You'll need to be strategic about how you invest what's left. I can help you put together a plan if you want." My mother's voice on the phone was tight and quiet. "That would be wonderful, Clara." I began the plan. I put it together carefully, conservatively, with their actual retirement needs mapped against realistic market returns. It was the right thing to do. It was also not the end of the story. There are people watching this right now who are thinking, "Clara, why didn't you just walk away? Why help the people who took from you?" And I want to answer that honestly, because I wasn't building toward revenge. I was building toward something that had nothing to do with them, and the retirement plan was just a thing that needed to be done. They were going to need help. I was capable of giving it. The accounting on that was simple. But something else was coming. Something that had nothing to do with generosity or obligation. Something that had been growing, quietly, for 10 years, in the structure of everything I'd built. It came in the form of a phone call. Not to me. To my parents. In year 8, I had acquired a stake in a regional property management company based in Indianapolis. The company managed about 400 residential units across 3 counties. Good cash flow, poor systems, a founding family that was ready to exit but couldn't agree on terms. I came in, restructured the operational finances, helped mediate the exit terms, bought out 2 of the founding partners, and ended up with a controlling stake. The company's value doubled in 18 months. I sold my stake in year 10. My return was approximately $6.2 million. I was 32 years old. My total assets were now in the range of $9 million, inclusive of the remaining positions I held. I had a small team of 2 people who helped me manage the portfolio. I had an attorney named James Whitfield who had been handling my corporate structures for 4 years. I had a financial planner, an accountant, and a very organized system of LLCs. And I had a property. Not in Chicago, in Hartwell, Indiana, a commercial property on Birch Avenue, 2 doors down from where my father's hardware store had once stood. I had purchased it 3 years earlier through one of my LLCs, quietly. A small investment, the property itself was only worth about $400,000. The purchase had been entirely unremarkable from the outside. LLC acquisitions of small commercial real estate in mid-sized Indiana towns don't make news. But this particular property sat in a block that was being quietly transformed. A regional grocery chain had bought the anchor property at the end of the street 18 months ago. A coffee brand I'd seen expanding successfully in 3 other markets had signed a letter of intent for the corner unit. Property values in this specific block were about to increase significantly. More importantly, the building my father's store had operated out of, the one that had been sold to cover his debts, was for lease. The new owner had been unable to find a tenant. The new owner was my LLC. I had bought it 14 months after my father sold it. He never knew. Year 10, October. My mother called on a Sunday, which was normal. The tone was different, which wasn't. "Clara," she said, "we need to talk about something, in person. Can you come home?" I said yes. I drove the 4 hours. I arrived on a Friday evening. The house was smaller than I remembered it. Or maybe I had gotten larger. My father looked older, thinner, the way men look when the work that defined them is gone. My mother was neat and composed and watchful in the way she'd always been. We sat at the kitchen table, the same Formica top, the same overhead light that buzzed slightly in cold weather. My mother had a folder. Inside the folder were documents I recognized the retirement plan I had built for them, plus some new papers I hadn't seen. She slid the folder across the table. "Your father is behind on the lease for the storage unit where he's keeping the old store equipment. she said. And the apartment building we moved into after the house they're raising the rent in January? We've run the numbers, and we're going to be short. She looked at me. We were hoping you might be able to help. She said it the way she'd said everything my whole life, as if it were obvious, as if the logic of the request required no acknowledgement of any prior history, as if the account had always been in her favor. I looked at the folder. I looked at her. I looked at my father, who was looking at the table. I reached into my bag and took out a different folder. Mine. I set it on the table next to hers. I have something for you to look at too, I said. My mother frowned slightly. What is this? Open it, I said. Inside was a document. The deed to a commercial property on Birch Avenue, Hartwell, Indiana, and a lease agreement. A lease agreement that had been prepared by James Whitfield and signed at the bottom with the name of my LLC. Above the LLC name, a note in my handwriting. The tenant is a business I'm backing. A specialty hardware and home goods retailer. Regional expansion. The space has been updated. The lease terms are favorable. The operator would benefit significantly from a store manager with 27 years of local market knowledge. My mother looked up. My father was reading. He read slowly. His hands were very still. The property, my mother said. You own it? My company does, I said. I bought it 14 months after you sold the store. The room was quiet. The overhead light buzzed. I'm not offering this as charity, I said. The business is a real investment. The store needs a real manager. The job comes with a salary. I'm offering it because it makes financial sense and because I am your daughter and I want you to be okay. My father looked up. His eyes were doing something I hadn't expected. Not shame, not pride. Something much quieter. Recognition. Clara, he said. My name, just my name, in a voice that understood every space between the sentences I hadn't said. There's one more thing, I said. I reached into the folder and pulled out a single sheet of paper. I placed it on the table. It was a printout of the original savings account statement, the one from 12 years ago. The zero balance at the bottom, the date of withdrawal, and underneath it, a second sheet, my own account statement, current balance. I didn't say anything about the numbers. I didn't need to. My mother looked at the papers for a long time. Clara, she started, you don't have to say anything. I said, I'm not here for an apology. I built what I built. This is what it looks like. She pressed her hand flat against the table. Her chin lifted slightly, the way it always did when she was managing something she wasn't sure how to manage. And then, something in her face shifted. The composure came apart, not dramatically, just at the edges. Her eyes filled. We should have fought harder for you, she said. That was wrong. What we did was wrong. It was the first time in my life she had said something like that to me. I didn't cry. I didn't feel the relief I might have expected. I felt something steadier. Something that had been there for 10 years, quietly, waiting for this moment to confirm what I had always known. That I had never needed their belief to build something real. That my belief in myself had been enough. That the $41,000 they gave away was the most expensive lesson they ever paid for, and I was the one who learned it. My father took the job. He started the following March. The store opened in April. The regional chain's management was initially skeptical of him. He was 61, from a different era of retail, set in his ways. Within 8 months, he had increased their customer retention metrics by 30% and established relationships with 18 local contractors who now bought exclusively through that location. My mother calls on Sundays. The conversations are different now. Not because everything is forgiven, not because the past has been rewritten, but because we are both finally talking to each other as people who have been honest about what happened. Diane knows. I told her myself. She sat with it for a while, and then she said, I should have given it back when I found out. I told her I didn't need her to have done that. What I needed was what happened instead, all of it, including the part where I had to figure it out alone. She visits when she can. We sit on her porch or mine and drink coffee and talk about her kids and my investments, and neither of us pretends that the past was something other than what it was. I still live in Chicago. Small apartment, nice neighborhood, good light in the mornings. I have a bookshelf with notebooks going back to when I was 12. The old ones are full of observations. Small injustices, carefully dated. Not collected for revenge. Collected because I was a girl who needed to know what was real, in a house where the real things were sometimes papered over with louder, shinier things. The last notebook has a different kind of entries. Acquisition dates, revenue figures, valuation milestones, the same careful handwriting, the same practice of writing down what is true. My grandmother, my mother's mother, used to say that money is just frozen time. What you do with your time becomes your money, and what you do with your money becomes your freedom. I think about that a lot. My parents gave $41,000 of my frozen time to someone else's party. They didn't know what they were doing. I don't think they thought of it as taking something from me. I think they genuinely believed I would be fine, that I was the one who would be fine. They were right, just not in the way they meant. I was fine because I had to be, and having to be was the thing that made me. That's not a lesson I would have chosen, but it's the one I got, and I'm not giving it back. If you're watching this and you've ever been the one who was expected to simply be fine, the one the resources skipped past, the one the attention moved away from, the one who sat across the table and swallowed something unfair and said nothing, I want to say one thing directly to you. The silence is not weakness. It can be strategy, not cold strategy. Not revenge strategy. Just the simple, powerful choice to stop waiting for them to fund what only you can build anyway. Your table is not where they seat you. Your table is what you build when you decide to stop waiting for a seat at theirs. That's my story. If it meant something to you, leave a comment. Tell me whether you think I should have said more that day, at the kitchen table. Should I have fought it then? Or was the silence worth it? And I want to know, has anyone ever underestimated you so completely that they gave you the one thing they didn't mean to? That one push that changed the whole direction. Type times table of my own times if you know exactly what I mean. If you're new here, there's another story in the description I think will stay with you. Subscribe if you want more. Thank you for being here. That was my story.